I think, we've already seen a kind of assault on academic freedom in the context of student protests in Palestine and so on. So some of that has been, under attrition anyways. And I think we are going to see more inconsistency in that realm. I think Elon Musk will play some role in the administration. So the inconsistency we see on X, I think, might alarmingly become something that we see broadly affecting American society. And we've already seen, pressure from donors and politicians on clamping down on protests, the right to peaceful protest about Palestine, draconian consequences for students who supported Palestinian rights, a kind of hounding of academics. So in some ways, two very cherished American principles of free speech and academic freedom, have already been under attack, and, with the support and blessings of a Democratic Party. And I think now we will basically see much more of that. The politicians are called the Modi Democrats, and many of the Indian Americans who vote Democrat here have been supporters of Modi. So I think some of that appeal, which is a sort of contradiction, a strongman appeal, and perhaps a natural inclination to supporting autocracy, is something that resonated here as well. I think also that there's a sense in which there are sections of the community, and large sections of the community, ally with Republican positions and the discourse of meritocracy. There is an idea that already a belief that policies like affirmative action discriminate against Asian Americans, including Indian Americans, and that again the discourse of inclusion, or DEI, is something that tends to benefit Hispanic and African American communities, but not so much the Asian American community. And so that could be one sort of reason. And secondly, I don't think there was any particularly strong, overwhelming association with Kamala Harris's Indian origin. That was not something that her campaign itself emphasized, and nor was it something that seemed to galvanize a large number of Indian American voters. So, plus, I think there is the belief that it's a misplaced belief in my view, but that Modi and Trump have a sort of closeness, and that Trump will be good for India. In policy which just sort of continues on track, right? And the policy is really shaped by the people that Trump appoints and so on. I think it's going to be inconsistency. I think he's going to, come for events or invite Modi, and there's going to be a lot of hugging. But, he put tariffs on certain things unless Harley Davidson, was made cheaper in India or something absurd. So there will be things of that kind. I think his, immigration policies may have a negative effect.
Liberal values, talked about free thought, freedom of expression. Now, are we seeing America move towards a process of insulating itself?
Excellent point. So first of all, I think those sort of claims that not just America but other Western nations make about, being a sort of bastion of free speech, human rights everywhere in the world, I think those claims need to be taken with a pinch of salt, and especially since, the war on terror and his support for Israel, a bucket of salt. Though one can make that claim, even going back decades or centuries. But there's America overseas and there's America at home. And America at home generally, while not perfect, is a generally good record of consistency in terms of respect for the Constitution, rule of law. Again, not perfect with police brutality and so on.
Hello and welcome to In Conversation with Kashmir Times. I'm Anuradha Bhasin. The US elections are just over. Donald Trump has won with a thumping majority, crossing the majority mark comfortably and poised to return to the White House once again. How do we dissect these results? What are the broader implications for America, the diaspora community, and the world? We'll try and talk about this today. And joining me is Rohit Chopra, a professor in the Department of Communication at Santa Clara University. He is a visiting scholar at the Center for South Asia at Stanford University, and his research centers on global online communities and the relationship of media, culture, and political memory, with a focus on Hindu right-wing communities. Rohit has written several books and he's the author of The Gita for a Global World, Ethical Action in an Age of Flux, The Virtual Hindu Nation, Saffron Nationalism and New Media, and Technology and Nationalism in India, besides several other books. Rohit, thank you for joining us on a very short notice.
Oh, thanks very much, Anuradha. I'm delighted to be here and to speak with you.
So, what are some of your initial thoughts on the results? Was it expected? And why has the Trump phenomena kind of revived with a bang? I mean, you could speak to these or any other questions. Just your initial
So,
thoughts.
yeah, I think one interesting thing, just a couple of days before the election, I was reading where political scientists and others were saying that uh, the polls may be a dead heat, but really there is no such thing as a dead heat when it comes to an election. That no matter what the polls reflect, the margin will be, significant, whichever candidate it breaks in favor of. Um, that said, and my sense till about a week earlier ago was I thought Trump was going to win, but after his last two speeches where he, referred, or a stand-up comedian at his rally referred to people from Puerto Rico as garbage, I thought things would have shifted. They obviously didn't. I think what has been surprising is the sort of scale and scope of the victory. And I think it speaks to a lot of things. I think one, it reflects the fact that Joe Biden left the race very late. Second, I think it speaks to a sort of vagueness in Democratic in Kamala Harris talking about her policies. But to me, most alarmingly, I think it does speak to some very disturbing underlying aspects of American society. And in fact, I should even say overt aspects of American society, because there is a very strong sort of element at race at work here, right? This is about whiteness. This is an assertion of white majoritarianism, along with a number of other factors, such as concerns about the economy. But I think that factor of race can't be discounted. When you look at demographics like white women voting overwhelmingly for Trump, despite the concerns, a lot of people had pointed to about women's rights and the like. Um, I think it's going to be a time of uncertainty. I think in some ways the first term give us a sense of what we are in for, and I think it's very likely that we will see more of that, and perhaps in a more extreme form.
So, has he been able to capture the imagination of the American voters better, or has he kind of capitalized on the flaws of the Democrats and Kamala Harris? As you said, it's a very, very popular mandate. He's not just won the electoral college; he's also won the popular vote.
Yeah, I think he's tapped into disaffection, and much of that disaffection uh, is, an anger has been projected onto the Democratic Party, even though it's not necessarily the Democratic Party's fault. So I think the longer sort of, issue here really over a horizon, a longer sort of historical horizon would be the question of, what is called neoliberalism and neoliberal pro-globalization policies and the like. Um, and which have led to sort of worsening inequality, the decline of American, manufacturing, the conditions of the Rust Belt. These were all factors in 2016 as well in states like Michigan, which the Democrats had taken for granted. Now, the irony here is that Trump himself has benefited from these policies, benefited from globalization, and so on. But there is a very sort of real anger about having been let down by both parties, uh, I think, and by politicians among a wide swath of the population, significantly a white working class population, but also, Latino population, perhaps. And that anger has come out on, other issues such as immigration. It's also combined with a sense of racial grievance, right? That somehow with the white working class or white people have been discriminated against. And Trump has been very successful, and the right wing has been very successful in painting the Democrat as a party of, elites, the party of the woke, focused more on, pronouns, on trans rights, and in the name of equality, taking away things that, are, I just say, sort of, white people are entitled to. So that racial animus, I think, really is at the heart of it. And that racial animus combined with the rise in inequality and what the economic commentator Kyla Scanlon called a vibe session. Over the last year, the American economy has done incredibly well. But if you sort of look at 2020 as a benchmark, between 2020 and 24, each year, given the rise of inflation, things are significantly more expensive. And a lot of people feel that they were worse off 4 years ago than they are now. Uh, Now, it's an interesting sort of sociological question about, uh, given everything else about Trump, were so many voters willing to overlook so many, problematic aspects, his convictions on, a number of grounds, the kinds of remarks he made, and what motivates that. And I think, I do come down to the question of sort of race here. Interestingly, it's something that a lot of commentators in the mainstream media kind of dance around. They don't use the word, white supremacist or white majoritarian, but I think in the Indian context, for example, we readily use that term. Uh, the same kind of logic really sort of is at work out here, that it is a combination of factors, but that is one very powerful factor. So I'd say the economy, the question of race, the question of entitlement, anger, and Trump successfully persuading a large number of people that the Democrats were to blame and taking things that were rightly belonged to certain groups by entitlement. He pulled that off.
But conversely, one could also argue that the Democrats were unable to, send across their message.
Absolutely, that's absolutely part of it. I think by as Kamala Harris came in sort of late, so in some ways it's sort of unfair to scapegoat her for this, right? Uh, we know, for instance, that Biden was facing some serious cognitive challenges, and we know that that is something that a circle that was close to him was keeping from others, right? And it's only when things came to a head that Harris came in. So she was in late. But they seemed to lack a clear message. And by the end of it, Harris was moving to the right. Oh, I'm a gun owner. I would protect myself with a gun. She shifted center right, on immigration. The stance on Israel cost the Democrats both ways. So they didn't really have any kind of clear message. And uh, I read somewhere that she did try to do the same thing that Hillary Clinton did in 2016, which is in an attempt to broaden her base, she attempted to reach out to Republican voters. Well, the problem is that despite that move to the right and seemingly taking a stance closer to the Republican point of view, an overwhelming majority of registered Republican voters still voted Republican anyways. So she lost the progressive uh, component. She lost some part of the liberal base. She alienated students and did not win, as a result of that trade-off, any potential Republican votes. So you're absolutely right.
You talked about her shift towards the right, and of course Trump winning. What are the implications of all of this on American politics and American society? It has been America has espoused liberal values, talked about free thought, freedom of expression. Now, are we seeing America move towards a process of insulating itself?
Excellent point. So first of all, I think those sort of claims that not just America but other Western nations make about, being a sort of bastion of free speech, human rights everywhere in the world. I think those claims need to be taken with a pinch of salt, and especially since the war on terror and is support for Israel a bucket of salt. Though one can make that claim, even going back decades or centuries. But there's America overseas and there's America at home, and America at home generally, while not perfect, is a generally good record of consistency in terms of respect for the Constitution, rule of law. Again, not perfect with police brutality and so on, but the belief was that across the aisle, those values kind of held, and uh, I think we've already seen a kind of assault on academic freedom in the context of student protests on Palestine and so on. So some of that has been uh, under attrition anyways. And I think we are going to see more inconsistency in that realm. I think you know, Elon Musk will play some role in the administration. So the inconsistency we see on X, I think, might alarmingly become something that we see broadly affecting American society. And we've already seen, pressure from donors and politicians on clamping down on protests, the right to peaceful protest about Palestine, draconian consequences for students who supported Palestinian rights, a kind of
Mhm.
hounding of academics. So in some ways, two very cherished American principles of free speech and academic freedom, have already been under attack, and with the support and blessings of a Democratic Party. And I think now we will basically see much more of that. The first term saw a normalization of open racism and bigotry. I think we are going to unfortunately see more of that. And I think for the world, it's going to have very alarming consequences. People are,
Yeah,
uh,
we'll come to that,
yeah,
but just for on America, you spoke about racism, and what is interesting about these elections is the shift in the way the people of color have voted.
yeah.
There is a decisive, shift towards in favor of Trump across communities. If you look at blacks, you look at Latinos, Arab Muslims, Asians. Is this shift driven by a single factor, or are there multiple factors? Is it different reasons for everybody, all of them?
I think there are multiple factors for different groups. So let's start with one of the easier ones, I would say. So Dearborn, Michigan, Arab Americans. Uh, Harris got a lower percentage of the vote than Jill Stein there. And it was something that Biden had overwhelmingly carried, right? And the Democrats were tone deaf just day or two before. I don't know if it was Dearborn itself, but there was some location in Michigan where Clinton delivered a completely disgraceful speech, essentially, defending the right of unconditionally supporting the right of Israel to slaughter Palestinians indiscriminately. There were representatives from the White House who were literally turned away from those places. So that Arab American vote is a vote that went against the Democrats for that particular reason. The male Hispanic or Latino vote, I've colleagues who say that Latinos is sort of very generic term, encompasses many different communities. But if we look at the Hispanic vote, let's call it that, uh, that's moved decisively towards Trump. And then there has been an increase in the male black vote and the black vote overall. Al Jazeera had a statistic that Biden got 9 out of 10 for every 10 votes. Biden got 9 from the black community or black men, I think, and Harris got 8. So, and there I would say, it is this idea. It is both patriarchy and misogyny. I mean, you look at the kind of obscene remarks that were made. The fact that there wasn't more of a pushback, right,
Mhm.
is something really alarming. And I think, it's this sort of aspect of this aggressive masculinity. It just seems to appeal to men across different racial groups for different reasons, plus the idea, beliefs like a woman being unfit to lead. Uh, the other thing that combined with that is that, I think they were the right wing sort of network, of podcasters and so on. I was reading it's a professor who had shared something about the vibe shifting after the assassination attempt on Trump. And one of the points he had mentioned was Professor Tyler Cowen. He runs a blog called Marginal Revolution. He said that the right wing has been much more effective at using podcasts, social media, etc., to get their message out. So in a way, I think they were successful in conflating Kamala Harris's identity with this culture of wokeness that allegedly the Democrats were committed to. And the idea that this is, ultimately a sort of very elite conversation. Uh, and I think that, the fact of the matter remains that it is likely true that beyond a certain number of people and certain groups, uh, questions of pronouns or land acknowledgements for Native Americans, these kinds of issues don't have the kind of wide purchase that some of the hot button emotive issues that the Republicans were running on had. And Kamala Harris was conflated as sort of the representative of this notion of elite university kind of wokeness, which just serves a very small group of people. And that was simultaneously, I think, sort of also wrapped as being in some ways kind of anti-male or undermining conventional masculinity. So I think all those factors played a role in male support for Trump. And yes, and of course, so that's for sort of male support. And then white women voting for Trump is another sort of issue altogether. which is, quite astonishing to me. I mean, that was in the last election too, and this election as well. They were another key decisive demographic. So there, I think the question of race comes in, and I think otherwise the question of, in the other cases, it's really about patriarchy and misogyny.
Hello, I'm Anuradha Bhasin, the managing editor of the Kashmir Times, which is now available in a digital format. We bring you in-depth coverage and news analysis to combat the erasure of Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh. For this, we need your support. Join us in our fight. Become a member today by paying an amount of your choice. Also subscribe to our YouTube news channel and our newsletter for free. Thank you. And what about the Indian Americans who have traditionally they voted for Democrats, but they've also overwhelmingly voted for Trump this time? Why is it?
Okay, so I haven't seen the exact numbers. Has it been a majority of them voting for Trump?
No,
Because
not majority. Yeah,
I
not,
saw that there was this Carnegie
but
survey
there is a
recently.
shift.
There's a shift. They said that there's an increase. Uh, So I think a number of reasons again. One is, the Indian Americans are, the politicians are called the Modi Democrats, and many of the Indian Americans who vote Democrat here have been supporters of Modi. So I think some of that appeal of, which is a sort of contradiction, strongman appeal, and perhaps a natural inclination to supporting autocracy, is something that resonated here as well. I think also that there was uh, there's a sense in which there are sections of the community and large sections of the community ally with Republican positions and the discourse of meritocracy. There is an idea that already a belief that policies like affirmative action discriminate against Asian Americans, including Indian Americans, and that again the discourse of inclusion or DEI is something that tends to benefit Hispanic and African American communities, but not so much the Asian American community. And so that could be one sort of reason. And secondly, I don't think there was any particularly strong, overwhelming association with Kamala Harris's Indian origin. That was not something that her campaign itself emphasized, and nor was it something that seemed to galvanize a large number of Indian American voters. So, plus, I think there is the belief that it's a misplaced belief in my view, but that Modi and Trump have a sort of closeness, and that Trump will, be good for India. It's ironic because just a few minutes ago, before our conversation, a friend shared an article from the print saying that Trump has called India a big abuser of tariffs. So there are going to be consequences. So this idea that somehow this is going to be some kind of honeymoon for India is just a fantasy.
So there are gray areas. But how do you see Trump's return to power shaping Indo-US relations?
I mean, Gautam Adani was, tweeted out something which was again absurd, like calling him a great man, a great leader, etc. I don't, yeah, for the most part, I think there's a lot of American government and American policy which just sort of continues on track, right? Uh, and the policy is really shaped by the people that Trump appoints and so on. I think it's going to be inconsistency. I think he's going to, come for events or invite Modi, and there's going to be a lot of hugging. But he put tariffs on certain things unless Harley Davidson, was made cheaper in India or something absurd. So there will be things of that kind. I think his, immigration policies may have a negative effect. He may not single out Indians in particular, but Steve Bannon, in 2016 or 15 had made remarks that or Steve Miller, one of his two sort of trusted aides, had made remarks that there are too many Indian and Chinese origin CEOs in Silicon Valley, anyways. So if Indians think that they are somehow going to be, or Hindu Americans and Indian Americans think that they are somehow magically going to be exempt from this kind of racial animus or being brought in this frame, I think that's a mistake. Is he going to do anything special for India? I don't think so. I think in general, he is going to be more isolationist, but he's going to be isolationist in an uneven way. He's expressed his sort of admiration for dictators of various sorts, and to that extent he will probably treat or consider Narendra Modi some kind of natural ally. But I don't think that India will stand to benefit significantly from anything. And if he does engage in make through on his promises on imposing tariffs across the board, I think India will suffer economically.
And what about the Hindu right wing? It's been very influential in the US. And now with Modi in power in India and Trump in the US, is that going to shape the political narrative and the society differently? Would polarization increase in the US and across continents?
I think absolutely it will. I mean, there's a strong section of them who are delighted. There's, of course, the paradox of what I call the Modi Democrats, which was the topic of a fantastic story by Caravan magazine a few years earlier, which is, and people like Ro Khanna or call themselves progressive, but, have willingly embraced Modi in the Indian context. There are others who are sort of pro-Trump and they will be delighted. But I think, that comes from a misguided sense of this idea that Indian Americans are a model minority or Hindu Americans as an ethnic group, which overlaps with but is not identical to Indian Americans. We are kind of a model group. And there is this sort of notion that somehow we have transcended our race, right? That in the way we are seen by whites, there is some sort of natural affinity because we are not marked by race in the way that, Hispanic Americans or African Americans might be. And that's just completely absurd. That's like a fantasy, right? It is this sort of, I think it's rooted in part in sort of casteism because the majority of Hindu Americans here do come from like privileged castes. It is also sort of, this idea of being a model minority, like, doing everything right and wanting to kind of be rewarded and being affiliated with power. So they may feel that their guy has won, and there is, I think groups like Hindu American Foundation are going to be exulting about, Usha Vance and so on. Interestingly, in a way that, they were not enthused about Kamala Harris, who is, also Indian by heritage. But I don't think that demographic is going to get any particular attention. And for your average, MAGA supporter, they can't tell the difference between a Hindu, Muslim, or a Sikh. The same terms, of abuse, racial abuse, and I wrote something recently about this. It's a term that was meant for uh, Sikhs, I think, initially, but then has
Mhm,
expanded to Hindus and all Indians. It's an abusive term, started maybe in Canada or in America. Pajit, the term of the Pajit, right? It's
mhm.
become a racial slur, and it talks about Indians as people who are filthy, unhygienic, eating cow dung, people who defecate in public. It's just absolutely atrocious. But you see that discourse among MAGA people, and there is no distinction that they make between, Muslims of Indian origin or Hindus of Indian or Bangladeshi origin or from wherever they might be, unless it's someone who happens to be a white Hindu who then gets marked as white first. So I think the celebrations will be short-lived. Yes, there will be certain players and certain groups that will have some ties with Republicans who will benefit from it and might try and leverage it. There might be some players who might, benefit from being de facto sort of agents, overseas agents of the BJP and so on. Overseas friends of the BJP are registered as foreign agents. But on the whole, I don't see this as a kind of salubrious development for Hindu Americans at all.
And what would be the implications for the global politics of Trump's rise? Many experts opine that broadly the foreign policy in US does not swing in the other direction, irrespective of whoever comes to power.
Right.
But Trump has talked about stopping wars, or his position on China and Ukraine, and especially Gaza. Is that going to be any different?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, yes, well, yes. I think in two respects it is. I should backtrack. I do think his support for Putin is very clear. And, we know that Musk had extensive contact with Putin over the last couple of years, which places the current administration in a quandary. He's their biggest defense contractor with $15 billion
Mhm.
worth of contracts. What do you do with that, right? Uh, so I think his sympathies for Putin, his sympathies for autocrats, his lack of respect for democracy, they don't bode well for Ukraine. What that probably means is that the war is going to continue. Is it going to mean, constraining the supply of arms to Ukraine? Perhaps, right? It's going to, but overall, it's going to strengthen China's hand, Russia's hand, and it's also going to strengthen, I think, China's hand. He's also sympathetic, for instance, to North Korea, right? Uh, so it is going to make the world in some ways more sort of multipolar. It is going to sort of weaken American authority. Uh, with Gaza, it's kind of a toss-up. I don't know. I don't know how that will play out, because there's a sense in which isolationism might actually cause result in causing less loss of life and suffering than American liberal interventionism, which has been completely sort of complicit in enabling war crimes and genocide. Uh, but I don't think he has any deep or overwhelming love for the Palestinians. Uh, he is unpredictable. Is he someone who is going to, be lock, stock, and barrel behind Netanyahu the way Biden was, for whatever mild criticisms Anthony Blinken may have made of Netanyahu now and then? Or is he just going to say, just let it be, in the same way that, he just moved out of like Afghanistan and left Biden to clean that mess? I don't know. I think that's an open question. I will say this, though. I think the uncertainty about what Trump will do is causing a lot of anxiety in international policy and diplomatic circles. So I think there's an urgency on the part of Europeans to, for instance, find ways that they themselves support Ukraine with more arms than they're capable of doing. And perhaps they will need to take a bigger role in facilitating whatever kind of unequal or even unjust peace there could be in Gaza.
So, what about democratic backsliding? Democracies around the world are witnessing a backsliding, including America in recent years. And do you predict under Trump this is going to happen even more? And how is that going to impact democracies in rest of the world?
Absolutely. It happened already. And I think part of it is not just Trump, it's by himself, but it's also because of, some of that even happened in the last administration because of the Supreme Court. So when you think about, overturning Roe v. Wade, that is also democratic backsliding, because, there is a question of the democratic and fundamental rights of women, right? And we might see the same thing with regard to gay rights. We will see the same thing with regard to the rights of, immigrants. We might see the same thing with regard to, for instance, naturalized citizens and birth citizens. These are very, very real and genuine worries. And, the conversations I'm having, people are saying that, yes, there will be legal challenges to all of these things, but these are very real and distinct possibilities. The worry this time around, as opposed to 2016, is that the court has moved even more to the right. You have a number of religious extremists, Catholic extremists on the court, for instance, who have their own vision of what America should be like. You have a player called Leopold Leo, who for years, right behind the scenes, has been kind of building this model of a kind of conservative religious state almost that he would like to see in place. So you have this commingling of race and civilization and and religion, right, which sees democracy in very instrumental ways, right, that as a means to an end rather than a value to be cherished. And the it is going to boost the worldwide trend of democracies being in retreat, of censorship, of repression, of the attrition of individual rights and minority rights. We saw this happen in the aftermath of 9/11, when the surveillance state model that the US set up was immediately imitated by countries across the world, right? The US kind of gave them a sanction to do that against their own citizens and against other citizens. And we see that playing out with what India has been doing, allegedly with like targeting, Sikh activists, pro-Khalistan activists in
Mhm.
Canada and so on. And I think we are going to see that very distressing trend. This is going to strengthen the hand of Erdogan, of Orban, of other aspiring dictators. This idea of might is right and of democracy as just a means to an end to getting to power, and a different sort of vision of who should control power, authority, who should have rights.
So, in this kind of a distressing situation, what role do you see for America's intelligentsia, the liberals, the media?
I think there are two things. One is the liberals need to really engage in soul searching about the distinction they make about the rights of Americans and the distinction they make about the rights of people elsewhere in the world. Because, if you claim to believe in universal human rights, the Palestinian life should matter as much as an American life. And for liberals, as much as most conservatives, that hasn't been the case. So I think the second thing is that wherever they alienated the progressive base in the hope that whatever they might lose there, they will gain. from conservatives. It didn't happen, right? So in university towns in Michigan, Harris was defeated because the students know what the universities did with cracking down on their rights, and they know that it happened under the Biden administration, right? The same thing with Gaza and Palestine. So pandering to the right, whether it's on gun rights or it's on, the sort of Israel-Palestine issue and so on, that's and I know the second one is a hard one for Democrats because they kind of got disadvantaged from both ends. There were some demographics that felt that they were too pro-Israel. There were others that felt that they weren't pro-Israel enough. So, but the Democratic Party right now needs to think about what its identity is, what are the causes that matter to it. The other factor is, even if the last year the economy was doing well, the perception was that under the Democrats, the economy had done disastrously. There were some interesting arguments made by people on social media. Again, I don't know what the empirical basis is that because in many democratic states, the cost of living is so high, like California, and there are regulations which prohibit housing, right? You've had an exodus of population, right? And you had an exodus of population, and a lot of people who might have been, let's say, moderates or even conservatives, but would have stayed in California. They their votes would not have shifted the electoral outcome because California still would have been blue. But by moving to other states over the last 2 decades, they've made purple states red or even blue states red, right? Now, how much truth there is to this, I don't know. But in some ways, the Democrats really need to become the party of the people as they claim that they are. For better or for worse, whether it's true or not, the Republicans now have the sort of populist ear. And the Democrats seem to be seen as the party of elites, at least this time around, out of touch elites. So these are things for them to sort of ponder about. Beyond that, for everyone, I always think of Gramsci's comment like, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Uh, so, that's it. You just sort of do the best you can and just hope things will not, be as negative as people fear they might be.
Yeah, I guess nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for answering these questions very lucidly and giving us important insights.
Oh, thank you so much, Anuradha. My pleasure.